Good morning. Welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Christina Schaefer, Social Media Manager for HAR. I'm joined this morning by Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
We're really excited. We have a lot to talk about today. So
great.
Yeah, we're excited. So that being said, if you're watching right now, go ahead and like this post, share it with your audience. We're going to be discussing a lot of different topics this morning with Congresswoman Fletcher. So also, if you have questions for her as we're going, just type them into the comments and we'll pull those up and check those out in a little bit. So just getting started, you've been in office for about 9 months now. What are you enjoying about your new role?
Oh, I love my job. I mean, I feel so lucky and privileged to get to represent this community, both the 7th Congressional District and the greater Houston community in Congress. And every day it's a new opportunity to learn and to be of service and to help people who live here and people across the country. And so I'm very grateful to be in this job. I'm loving it.
Yeah, that's good to hear. That's so exciting. I would imagine when you're running for office, there's expectations that you might have for it. How are they matching up with the reality?
You know, it's funny. I'm not sure I knew what to expect. I'd never run for office before. I was a first-time candidate, and I felt that there were lessons that we Houstonians could really bring to Washington.
Right.
And I talked about that a lot as a candidate, that, you know, we need to work together more, and we need to take care of our neighbors, and we really need to sort of share our Houston values in Washington. But I didn't really know how it worked because I hadn't worked there before or been an intern or anything else. That said, I had some idea of what I thought I was getting into, and the truth is it has exceeded my expectations. I feel like there's so many opportunities to do good things. There are a lot of really good people up there who are working hard, who spent years developing an expertise, really understanding the issues, and who are committed to working hard to try to improve life for Americans across the country. Certainly there are disagreements, but I really try to focus on the things that we can do where we can work together and move things forward and solve problems. And I think there are a lot of people there committed to doing that. So definitely exceeded expectations.
Yeah. So you were only in office a few months before someone announced that they were going to be running for that position. Do you think that's because you flipped your district, or why do you think the reason is for that?
Sure. I mean, I think that there's a lot that goes into it, and I think that I'm sure that even before I was elected, there were people thinking if they had the opportunity to run, they would try to take it, because this job, like I said, it's an incredible privilege. And so I always tell people I have a great job, and I'm not surprised that other people want it.
Yeah. Did you take it as a compliment?
Well, I think that it is not. A lot of people jumped in right away, so I don't know that it has to do really with me as much as wanting to get to do this job. But like I said, I think it is. It makes sense to me that people want to jump in, do this work, and I am really just focusing on getting my office up and running. We have an incredible operation here in Houston as well as in Washington. A lot of Houstonians in my Washington office and folks who have come up from the district. And then we have a great district team here that's doing all kinds of constituent services. And so my focus has really been doing a good job so that the constituents will send me back next year.
Yeah. There have been a lot of elected officials, specifically in Texas, that have announced that they're not seeking re-election or they're retiring. Do you think those are just individual decisions? Do you think that speaks to something broader? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I do think that, you know, for each representative, each elected official, you have to make your own choices about whether you want to engage in the campaigning. You know, the House of Representatives, we run for office every 2 years, so it is a lot, and I think for many people it takes a toll. And I think that it's good to have some changes in the dynamic, different people coming and going in the delegation. I think that that's important too. I also think it's useful to have people who've been around a while, who know how things work and can get things done. So it's good to have that variety, and I think that what we're seeing now is there are a combination of factors, but it's going to be a tough year in 2020, and I think there are a lot of people who've said they're ready to do something else, and there are a whole lot of people who are ready to step up and do the work. So I think it's exciting.
Yeah, that's great. So just a reminder, if you're watching, share this with your audience so they can hear from Congresswoman Fletcher. Also, if you have any comments for her, type them into the comment section, or questions, I should say, type them into the comment section, and we'll get to those in just a little bit. A little bit heavier subject here. In light of the recent mass shootings, do you think there's anything that could be done or should be done, and if so, what?
I do, and I'm glad you asked that question, because I think it is the thing that I have heard the most about from my constituents, that people are really concerned about their safety. They're concerned about us passing common sense gun safety legislation, and the House has already passed common sense gun safety legislation, 2 bills that were ready to go when we took office in January. The first bill we passed, H.R. 8, is a common sense background check bill. I heard from lots of responsible gun owners in my district who said, absolutely, we should have background checks on these sales. There are appropriate safeguards in place for family transfers and other things, but it's just a common sense measure. And something like 98%, 95 to 98% in different surveys say that they support this measure of Americans across the country. And that has been an overwhelming message from my district. So the House of Representatives passed that bill. We also passed another bill, H.R. 1112, which dealt with a different loophole in the background check system. It was the loophole that would have caught the Charleston shooter. As you may remember, there was a shooting a few years ago in a church in Charleston during Bible study. And I don't think anyone in our community or anyone in our country should live in fear of going to church, of going to synagogue, of going to temple. I think that we shouldn't be afraid to go to concerts, and we shouldn't be afraid to go to Walmart on the weekends. And to the mall, exactly. And there are things we can do. It won't solve every problem. It won't stop everything. But I think there are common sense things that we can do, and we should do them. So the House has passed those 2 bills and is looking at additional legislation, but those bills are sitting in the Senate waiting for the Senate in Washington to take them up. So I am hopeful that when we get back in September, the Senate will take up those bills and we can actually see progress on common sense background checks and just overall safety legislation. That is an issue that I think is critical to the people in my district and to people across the country.
Okay, very good. Switching topics here, the National Flood Insurance Program. We've talked about it a lot on this program. Obviously, something that's very important to our members. They're helping people buy and sell homes, so it affects them. Do you support a long-term reauthorization of the NFIP?
I do. I think it's absolutely critical, and that's a different issue that still deals with safety, and that's something that I've heard, especially in the last 8 months that I've been in office. There are people who've experienced flooding 1, 2, 3 times in the last few years, and they don't feel safe in their homes in a different way, and they're worried about flooding. And so we need to deal with this at an infrastructure-wide level, but we also need to make sure that people have the resources available to them should something happen. Sure. And flood insurance is the quickest route to do it. So I think we absolutely have to reauthorize the National Flood Insurance Program with a long-term reauthorization.
Yeah. So the current one is set to expire September 30th. Do you see that being another short term? Do you think it's possible it's a longer term solution?
I think it's possible. I had some conversations earlier this year with Chairwoman Waters. She is the chairwoman of the Financial Services Committee that's doing the reauthorization. And she's very optimistic that there is a bipartisan agreement that they are working through. So I think there's a possibility that might not be completed by the end of September, but I feel confident that if that's the case, there would be a short-term reauthorization, and we won't let the program lapse while the final details get worked out. But my sense is that there is a good working group that's working on a bipartisan solution to this issue.
Okay. Just going to take a quick moment to see if we have any questions. Looks like just a lot of people telling you good morning this morning.
Oh, good. Good morning.
So if you have any questions that you would like us to ask Congresswoman Fletcher, type them into the comments and we'll get to those in just a little bit. So want to talk a little bit about, obviously realtor related issues. Do you support some level of government participation in like the secondary mortgage market to ensure liquidity?
I do. I think that if you look at our history, the government role through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac has really been a critical driver in expanding homeownership and making homeownership accessible and affordable. And now, as certainly it's been a hot topic of conversation about necessary potential reforms, but I think overall the government continuing to have a role to make sure that there is liquidity, to bring people into the markets who might not otherwise be investing in those mortgages, to make sure that the banks then have the capital to lend and help people get access to capital to buy what is, for most people, the most important investment they ever make.
Sure, absolutely. And we were talking before we got started. I was excited to hear that you're a big fan of har.com and our app.
I am. My husband might tell you I'm too much of a fan of har.com and the app, but I do have the app on my phone and my iPad, and I love to just check it out either when I'm traveling around the district to see kind of what's happening and whether people are coming and going, and then for my own sort of perusing, window shopping, as we said, and sort of seeing what's out there. But I think it's an incredible tool. Far superior, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but far superior to many of the other tools I've seen out there. It's just great. So,
well, I don't know if you're allowed to say it, but we enjoy hearing it. So, and I'm sure our members do too, because obviously it brings them leads and clients and customers. So they're happy to hear that as well. So I had another question here about infrastructure package. What do you think is the likelihood of an infrastructure package moving through Congress this session?
Well, we are working on it, and I'll give you a little bit of congressional trivia.
Okay.
So in any Congress, we're in the 116th Congress now. In any Congress, the first 10 bills are reserved for the majority party, so this time the Democrats, and you identify HR 1 through 10. Those are kind of your top priorities.
Okay.
And then HR 11 through 20 belong to the minority parties, the Republicans, and those, they can signal their top priorities. And so for us, the infrastructure bill that is forthcoming is HR 2, which tells you of the 10,000 or so bills that will get filed this year, it is a top priority for this Congress to make sure that we get an infrastructure bill. And I serve on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I asked to do that when I got to Washington because I wanted to serve on the committees that were most important to this district. And so I'm on Transportation and Infrastructure, and then I'm on Space Science and Technology. So working on those committees, on the infrastructure committee, we're working on a big package, and there's been a little bit of back and forth with what will happen with the administration and whether it gets through the Senate, but we're not stopping our work. So we started with our initial hearings on kind of the cost of doing nothing and what happens if we just don't invest in our infrastructure. And it's clear to anybody driving around Houston, driving around the state, we have roads and bridges that need repair. We also have other kinds of infrastructure, whether it's pipelines, that we need to be focused on. And also we need to think about our natural infrastructure and resiliency and rebuilding, especially after a storm like Harvey, using natural infrastructure, using more resilient materials, making sure that we are able to withstand whatever the future may bring. And so that conversation is one that's ongoing, and we will put together a bill, and I am optimistic that we can still get it through Congress, even though it's had some starts and stops for everybody watching the news, but we're committed to doing it, and we're working hard on it.
Very good. So I have a question that came through from Aisha. She said, do you know about the GRACE Act, HR 2146? And then she kind of defined it here to us. If you, she said, it's also known as the Guaranteed Refugee Admission Ceiling Enactment Act. It will set an annual refugee admissions floor of $95,000, crucial preserving the state of modern refugee resettlement program in the U.S.
This is something that we've been talking about a lot in general because as many people may know, especially in the last couple of years, watching our administration's immigration policies and efforts with refugees, we are settling fewer refugees now than in prior administrations, and that's a decision that is delegated to the administrations and then Congress delegated. Many people feel, especially in our community, that it's important that we continue to resettle refugees. And in fact, Houston and Harris County has one of the highest refugee resettlement rates, not just in the country, but in the world. I think the last look I had was something like 1 in 10 of every refugees that the United Nations resettles come to Harris County. So that is something that I think we fully believe in here in this county. And it's something that we talk about in Washington, making sure that we're continuing to resettle refugees here. And of course, immigration writ large is a major topic. And I think one of the things that I've talked about a lot is we need comprehensive immigration reform to make sure that we have a path for people to come to the United States, to address a lot of the failures in the system. And certainly the reduction in refugee resettlement in the last couple of years is very troubling for those of us in this community and for me. So I'm committed to making sure that we can try to bring it back up to the levels that we've seen before and make sure that we are resettling as many people as we can.
That's great. That's great to hear. Actually, don't see any other questions coming in from our members yet, but if you have a question for Congresswoman Fletcher, type it into the comments. Is there anything else you wanted to share with us? Anything else you're really passionate about? I know we just heard about infrastructure, but is there anything else that our viewers should know?
Sure. Well, I'm happy to talk about a couple of things, and if you get another question, just sort of switch on and off. But I don't think it's lost on any of us that we just had the anniversary of Hurricane Harvey over the weekend, and that's something that continues to be a major issue. I was just in Maryland last week, actually, with one of your members, with a realtor, going around kind of looking at different challenges that homeowners face there. And of course, it's a big issue for a lot of my constituents on the west side as well, thinking about the past and planning for the future. And there's still a lot of uncertainty. So I have worked with our delegation and really tried to be a leader in making sure that we get the funding that is supposed to be coming our way. It's been tied up in kind of administrative red tape, and that's very frustrating for many of us. So I was very pleased that I worked on a bill that wound up getting signed into law through an appropriations bill to make sure that the process kept moving. And so we took the last big step last Friday, where HUD published the rules for the administration of certain disaster recovery grants. So that is some progress there, but we're continuing to work and to fight for that. And so another thing that I did, the very first bill that I introduced in Congress is called the HELP Act, and it is a bill that's designed to eliminate some of the red tape to recovery that the city of Houston, Harris County Flood Control, other folks told me as I took office were the challenges that they faced in trying to even get started on flood mitigation projects, that there's some bureaucratic red tape. So I put together a bipartisan group that sponsored this first bill and was very excited to work with colleagues across the aisle to make sure that we're addressing this problem. So that was the very first bill I've introduced. I've introduced several since then, and I'm very proud to see several of my bills and amendments make it through the process. Some of the amendments have been voted on out of the House. And I guess, that first bill was bipartisan, but so much of what we do is bipartisan. And I do think it's important for your viewers to know and for people to know as much as possible that there's a lot of work that is getting done. It's not what you see on the news, and I think a lot of people feel a sense of frustration. And certainly there's gridlock, and certainly there's disagreement. So it's not to say that it's not that those things are out there, but it's that we're able to continue to work on certain things that need to get done. And my statistics are a little bit out of date, but the last time I counted up, something like 96% of the bills that we had voted on in Congress, that we voted on the House floor, passed with bipartisan support. And two-thirds of those, 86% had a two-thirds majority, at least. So an overwhelming bipartisan effort. And I think that sometimes because we focus on the divisions and the things that aren't resolved, people don't have a sense that there's a lot of good stuff that is happening. And I think that when I tell people that, I really get a renewed sense of hope and optimism. And I think it's important for people to know that. It's certainly not what I had seen going in. And I feel like it's something that makes everybody, including me, feel better about the process.
I was going to say that I think that makes everybody feel a little bit better to hear. Those numbers are a lot better than what you hear on the news and things like that. So Peggy just has a comment here. She said, "What an articulate, thoughtful representative, so proud to be represented by you."
Oh, thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Peggy.
Aisha, she was following up on her question about the GRACE Act. She said, "Would you co-sponsor the GRACE Act?"
Well, we'll certainly take a look. We have a process in our office for anything like that, and so I'm sure someone on my legislative staff has probably already written down the number. I think it was 2156 to read the bill and make sure. But that's another thing I can sort of add in, which is that is how we learn what's happening. As I mentioned earlier, there can be as many as 10,000 bills filed. I think we're already probably up to 4,000 something, if not more. And so the way that I know what my constituents want me to do is when they call or write, send emails. And so we will definitely take a look at it. And I have certainly already signed on to some letters and some other initiatives to say that I support maintaining the current refugee levels. Now, I can't remember off the top of my head if it's in particular that piece of legislation, but I've certainly gone on record as saying I support these efforts in general. And so we'll definitely take a look at it.
All right, yeah. That was HR 2146.
Oh, 2146.
Yes.
56. But they'll find it. It's a good thing to have the notes, too, and you can look back at the Facebook Live.
So Angel had just another comment. Thank you for ensuring you're not letting these key issues fall through the cracks. Love the HELP program.
Oh, terrific. Thank you. Thank you, Angel.
Robert said, I'm interested to hear your opinion on climate concerns and the initiatives you're involved with regarding solar. Would love to hear your opinions about rooftop solar and industrial solar fields.
Great. Well, I'll try to take those in that order, but in general, I do a lot of work in this space on energy and environment. And as I mentioned, I'm on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and there I sit on the Energy Subcommittee, and then I am the chair of the Environment Subcommittee. And I think it's really important for people across the country to know that I represent the energy capital. I represent the energy corridor, for everyone who hasn't memorized my district boundaries. But I basically run from just inside the loop all the way west to Katy, go up to Jersey Village, down to Meyerland. And so I really cover a lot of ground, and I cover a lot of folks who work in the energy industry. And what I want to tell people is this is the heart of our it's the energy capital of the world, and we care about the environment too. And we care about our future, and we care about sustainable future. And I think that's important for people to know and for us to show leadership. And so what I see happening is a new conversation about what our energy future looks like. And Texas has been a leader in energy, including in alternative forms of energy. Texas has the largest wind energy production of any state in the country, and it's actually 6 times more than the next leading state. And this is thanks to Governor Perry many years ago really incentivizing these programs. And so we've seen that in Texas. We also have a huge solar presence here. I actually met with some folks earlier this year whose headquarters is in my district, who are really responsible for a lot of residential solar installation. And so there's a lot going on in solar and wind. Certainly a lot of the technologies offshore would be applicable to offshore wind as well as traditional sources of energy. But I think Texas has it right that we need to have an all of the above approach, and we need people who are involved in the energy industry to help chart the path forward. And we see a lot of leadership from people in this community on these issues. And so I want to continue to encourage that and to have us really be leading the conversation about what our energy future looks like.
Yeah, that's great. Marilyn asked, what is your stance on GSE reform?
I'm not sure exactly what she's referring to. So that's a question. Maybe she can fill that in.
Yeah, I'm sure
because there are a couple of things that come to mind when she says that. But while we wait for that maybe to come back in, Marilyn, please. That reminded me of one other thing I want to say. I sort of talked about Washington and kind of what we're doing in Washington. The other thing that I think is important for people to know, and especially for your members to know, is that members of Congress can be incredibly helpful to constituents, and we have constituent services here in our office. I have a district office that's just in the Galleria area right on San Felipe, and there's so many things that we can do to help with federal agencies. And so, whether it is dealing with the SBA or Medicare or Social Security or some kind of federally guaranteed loan or a letter from the IRS. There are all kinds of ways that we can be useful. And I think that we're very self-sufficient here, and a lot of people don't think to call. But I have a full-time team that works here in Houston trying to make sure that people know what we can do. And so it's a great resource for your members who are my constituents, and also for them to be able to tell people who are buying homes in the district, hey, your member of Congress can help with all kinds of things. We've gotten a lot of calls about immigration issues. visas, passports. I mean, there's a lot of stuff we can do, and so I love to mention that as well, because we've got a really terrific team here working, and it's another resource for your members to be able to call or to have, to be able to refer people to our office for help.
Well, our members are very vocal, so I'm sure your phone's going to be ringing. Marilyn just followed up Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Oh, sure. So I think, that was part of your earlier question. Do you support just overall government support for liquidity in the market? And I do think that we need to continue. Like I said, there's a lot of conversation, and I think both from Chairwoman Waters on financial services as well as in the Senate, I think that there is a commitment to seeing them go forward. There are discussions about how exactly they should be changed, and I haven't been involved in that level of detail since I'm not on the Financial Services Committee. But I do think just more broadly, whether we continue to have a role for the federal government in that funding and shoring up those markets and in making sure there's liquidity there, I do support that. That doesn't mean that there haven't been some issues that have been identified that could be streamlined, and probably your members know, and the folks who do either the originations or are dealing with reselling the loans have some idea of room for improvement. I think there's always room for improvement, but overall, in terms of whether we should continue to have the government functioning and participating and playing a role, I do believe that we should.
Absolutely. And she just made a follow-up comment. Congress needs to maintain a strong housing finance system.
Well, look, I think that what we've seen is that in 1938, when the federal government got involved, that really opened the door to people having access to capital, to being able to buy their homes. As I said earlier, for many people, it's the most important investment they ever make, and it's also an important stepping stone to having a strong middle class, and that's something that the Democratic caucus is very committed to, making sure that we're doing things for the people and that we have programs and incentives in place to help people have a stable and secure income and retirement, and having a good middle class life. Having access to capital to buy a house and to make that investment is really the cornerstone to financial stability and security. And so I think that we've seen in the nearly 100 years that we've been doing it that there are a lot of benefits to having the government involved.
Absolutely. So before we got started, you gave us your website. Is that another place that people can reach out to you, or
absolutely,
can they see what you're working on, or what can they find
there? So thanks for that question too, because just as I love the HAR app, we're available online and social media. So the website, fletcher.house.gov, has forms where you can access information about votes I've taken, things I'm working on, press releases. There's also a way to communicate with the office and fill in a form. We respond to all the correspondence that we receive. So we've gotten a lot of it. So we're working up, and like I said, sometimes people ask questions that we have to check out. Whether it's a bill we haven't heard of or other things. So I appreciate getting all of the contact. We also have a Facebook page and Twitter and Instagram, and so that's a great way to keep up. I try to post pretty frequently on what we're doing, especially when I'm home, like right now, and out and about in the community. And it's a way we get a word out about what we're doing. So I would mention, you can also sign up for my emails, anyone who wants to do that, and that will also be, they're not frequent, we try not to spam anybody. It's, once or twice a month you'll get a notice that we're doing a town hall or something else. But I am trying to do events all over the district and really engage people and have them find me where it's most convenient for them. So we're doing quarterly big town halls with kind of any topic. We're doing every other month, when we don't have a big town hall, we're doing kind of a town hall on a topic, which we call a community conversation. So tomorrow night we're doing one on healthcare at Beth Israel. We've done one on flooding. We've done one on transportation, trying to focus the conversation and bring in some local experts. So we do those. I've been going to various Kroger's all over the district for an Across the Aisles event where you can just come chat with me about whatever you want in the grocery store. We have open office hours that people can sign up for to come visit with me, and of course people can make an appointment by calling the office, and really just trying to get as many places as I can and hear from people, because that's my job, is to represent them. And so for me, I need to hear what's on their mind, what their priorities are, what they care about, and that gives me the opportunity to do the best job I can in Washington.
Very good. Okay. I was just going to take a look. A couple other things came in about the financial committee. Suggested evidence that there's racial discrimination. Do you know anything about that?
In terms of housing?
It says in terms of the home buying process, yes.
Well, I do know that that's something the Financial Services Committee is very focused on looking at and paying attention to making sure that people are complying with all of the federal statutes, making sure that there isn't discrimination in lending or in home buying. And of course, that's something that we addressed with the Equality Act, because not everyone falls into the category of having protection in terms of housing. And there is still housing discrimination that goes on. And so in Congress, we are working to eradicate that. And I think in financial services, they are doing a deeper dive into some of these programs to make sure that, and that's another benefit of having the federal government involved in the markets, is to make sure that these laws are being followed and that we're doing everything we can to eliminate discrimination in housing.
Very good. Well, thank you so much. I know I don't want to keep you over our time limit here. I know you're very busy and have other events that you're attending today, but thank you so much for joining us. This was really informative, and I know our members appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I love being here, and I'm happy to come back anytime.
Well, we'll be calling you.
Thanks.
Well, that is it for this Member Focus Monday. We will not be back next week because next week is Labor Day, so we will not be in the building, actually, but we will be back the following Monday at 9 a.m. We'll see you then. Have a great week.